All right. Are we on? All right. All right. So, I guess I'll just get right into it. Since Pastor's out of town, he asked me to bring a devotion, and we normally go to about 8:15, so I thought I'd have like 15 minutes, but it looks like I got quite a bit more time than that. So we might get done a little early tonight. But Proverbs chapter number 11 and verse number 14. If you'd like to stand, if you're able for the reading of God's word, we're just going to read one verse, and then we'll pray and get started. Sorry, no kids class tonight. Normally I teach the kids. We're going through the life of David for the kids, but no kids class tonight because I'm in here. So, Proverbs chapter number 11 and verse number 14 says, "Where no counsel is, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors there is safety." Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this lesson that you've taught me, Lord, and it seems like I need to be reminded of it over and over again. But Lord, I pray that you'd help me be able to get across your truth, the truths of your word, Lord, and I pray that we would all be able to apply your word to our own lives and our own situations, Lord. And I thank you so much for this night and for our church being able to get together. In your name I pray. Amen. All right, you can be seated. So, it was a short verse, but I probably gave away the topic of tonight's sermon is about getting counsel, getting good, wise counsel. And where is your counsel coming from, right? So, starting off, so whenever you make a plan, things tend to go better, right? And without a plan, things tend to not work out so well. And I'm not one that is great at planning, right? Some people are just gifted. They have the gift of administration, and they're good at making plans and sticking to their plans. It's not something that comes supernatural to me, and it's something I have to work on. But some of the biggest things about making plans is getting wise counsel, right? So, my lack of planning in nature is a family trait a lot of times. My dad used to tell this story when he was a kid about I don't know how old he was, 6 or 8, but his parents told him, my grandparents told him, don't play with fire. Kid, don't play with fire. So he was not allowed to play with fire. So he'd go over to his neighbor's house. I forget his name, Timmy, maybe his name was. He'd go over to Timmy's house, and him and all of his friends, and they'd start a fire in their backyard and cook marshmallows. And he'd take these marshmallows, and as a kid, even as a kid, you can only eat so many marshmallows. I don't know if you've ever been camping and experienced that as a kid. I remember being like, oh, I want marshmallows, and your eyes are bigger than your stomach. And then after you get through so many marshmallows, you just don't want any more marshmallows. So that's the situation that they were in. So he's sitting there, he has this marshmallow over the fire. He just sticks it in the fire and watching it burn, and just enjoying the fire. And he's not supposed to be playing with fire at all, right? But as kids do, and he's going along, and then he has this marshmallow that's on fire on the end of his stick. And they had this other neighbor, his name was Mr. Quinn, I remember very specifically. And Mr. Quinn was just a crotchety old man. He was not nice to kids at all. And I remember my dad telling me details about Mr. Quinn, like his lawn was just perfect. I mean, every blade of grass was absolutely on point. His house was white, and it was always washed and sparkly. And if anyone threw a ball in his backyard over his fence, he wouldn't just throw the ball back. He'd cut the ball up and throw it back. He was like this guy. Nobody in the neighborhood, none of the kids liked Mr. Quinn. So anyway, Mr. Quinn is next to Timmy's house. So he looks over at Mr. Quinn's nice big white garage door on the other side of the fence. And my dad gets this idea. I'm going to take this burning this marshmallow, I'm going to go over to the fence, and I'm just going to puck it at the garage. So he does. He takes and he pucks it at the garage, and bam, it smacks against the garage, and he's laughing. He tells all of his friends, look what I did. And then they all start doing it, right? They all get marshmallows in the fire, get them lit on fire, and they go over. And then there's like an assembly line, right? Like a firing squad. Ready, fire! Puck, 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 all against this garage. But that was about the end of their plans. They didn't plan anything after that. Like, it was just, that was it. They didn't get wise counsel on what is the consequences of doing this, right? And I remember as a kid, my brother, I had an older brother, Luke, who, for his 10th birthday, he got a pocket knife. He loved his pocket knife. I think I was talking to somebody last week about this, actually. But he loved his pocket knife. He got this new pocket knife, was so proud of it. And we had pews back then at Wooden Valley when I was a kid. Wooden pews. And so my brother's in the back row, and he said, I'm going to carve my name in the back of this pew. You know, as a 10-year-old, that's a great idea. Didn't really plan on what are the consequences of my actions, right? Didn't really get any counsel about that. Didn't make any plans. Just, it came to mind. I'm going to do it, right? And my brother also, he'll tell this story about when we were young. He had a problem of going to the bathroom in his pants, right? This was a problem my brother had, which I shared. It was a family trait. I also had that problem. But my brother, he would go to the bathroom in his pants, and he wouldn't want anybody to know. Like, that's not a great thing to tell your friends or your parents or anybody. So what he'd do is he'd take his soiled underwear and he would stick it behind the toilet in that little nook back there where nobody would find it. And my son's learning that trait. We need to cut that off. That needs to stop. But he would. That's what he would do. Well, the problem with that is that it doesn't go away. It's still there. And then over time, what would happen is it would get so stuffed and the room would just fester, and eventually what started as a little thing became a big thing, and eventually you get caught. So I learned, right? I would get rid of my soiled underwear by sticking them down my pant leg. That way they would make it into the washing machine. Problem solved, right? But anyway. But getting wise counsel on what, and those are just funny stories. But when I was a kid, this is one that I dealt with really. I remember coming to an understanding as a young kid that not everyone's counsel is good, right? I remember my friends used to, I don't know why I called them my friends, but my friends would always do things to me, and then they would always convince me to do things that would get me hurt, and then after I would get hurt, they would point and laugh at me. This was like a common thing. And it was over and over and over again. Then this one time, I'm at my friend's house, and he comes up and he says, Johnny, there's a hornet's nest outside. Take this stick and go poke the hornet's nest. And I'm like, I remember it dawning on me, no. You guys always do this. You convince me, and I had this conversation. You convince me to do something, and I get hurt, and then you laugh at me. That's the way it always happens, you know? And they said, no. You won't get hurt. Wear this mask, this paintball mask, and, put some towels on your head and on your arms so there's no skin showing and you won't get hurt. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it because you always convince me, and then you point and laugh. Somehow, they get me to do it. So I'm out there. I have a paintball mask on and towels wrapped around my arms and my legs. And I have the stick, and I remember walking up to this hornet's nest. I'm like within 5 feet of the hornet's nest. All of a sudden, these hornets start dive bombing my mask, and they're bouncing off the glass. And I'm just like, oh! And my friend is behind me with a video camera, video recording me. So I hit that hornet's nest. And that was the end of my plans. I did not think what happens after. So immediately when I hit the hornet's nest, the sky turns black. Like, I did not know that many hornets could be in one little nest. It was like the size of a baseball. There's no way it could have that many hornets in it, but the hornets just completely surround me, and I don't know what to do. So I just drop the stick, and I start running. Well, when I start running, some of the towels start flying off of me, and I get stung on the ankle, and I'm just like, I did not know that hornets, it's like I felt like I got shot with a gun. I was like, oh my goodness, this hurts so bad. And then my friend comes up with a video recorder, and pointing and laughing at me. And I remember like just thinking, this is exactly what I said was going to happen, and this is what happened. And where you get your counsel from matters. So we're going to turn in your Bibles to 1 Kings chapter number 12. 1 Kings chapter number 12, and we're going to talk about a story in the Bible of someone who got counsel. And this is going to be the story of Rehoboam. So, if you know your history of Israel, in Bible history, right, the children of Israel came out of Egypt, right? They had Moses as their leader, came out of Egypt. Moses passes away. Joshua takes over and takes them into the Promised Land. They get into the Promised Land, and they have judges for a while, and then they have their first king, King Saul, who is not the greatest king. And then after that, you have King David, who we're learning about. The kids are learning about King David on Wednesday nights, who was a great king. He was a really good king. And then his son, who knows his son's name? Solomon. So Solomon was the richest man to ever live of all time. He literally, when he became king, he asked God for wisdom, and God granted him wisdom. And I'm always confused about that, because you look at the life of Solomon, and at the end of his life, he regrets all of his decisions. So it's like, how was that wise? But if you take it from a different lens, right? If you look at the life of Solomon from a human lens, the guy conquered the known world without one battle. Literally. He had every nation of the world bringing gifts to him. He never had one battle in his life, and he conquered the entire world. He was literally like 17 times richer than the next richest man to have ever lived in all of history. The guy was an amazing person, King Solomon. So he has his son. King Solomon passes away, and his son, Rehoboam, becomes king. And it's the only son recorded, which you got to think he had to have more than one son. I mean, if he had 700 wives, surely he had more than one son. But this is the son who became the next king, and the only son that the Bible talks about is Rehoboam. It said, and Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel were come to Shechem to make him king. And it came to pass when Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who was yet in Egypt, heard of it, for he was fled from the presence of King Solomon, and Jeroboam dwelt in Egypt, that they sent and called him. And Jeroboam and all the congregation of Israel came and spake unto Rehoboam, saying, Thy father made our yoke grievous. Now therefore, make thou the grievous service of thy father, which his heavy yoke, which he put upon us, lighter, and we will serve thee. And he said unto them, Depart yet for 3 days, then come again to me, and the people departed. So this is what's happening, right? Rehoboam, he's becoming king, and Jeroboam, this guy who his dad didn't necessarily get along with, right? The guy ran away to Egypt to get away from King Solomon. So King Solomon passes off the scene. Jeroboam decides he's coming back, and he gets with the leaders of Israel, and they come to where Rehoboam is being put as king, and they say, hey, we will serve you forever, but make the yoke that your father put on us lighter. Let's use common terminology. Lower the taxes. The taxes are too high. We need things to be easier because your father had a heavy tax on us, and we want lighter taxes. Right? That's what he's asking for. And so he said, just make the taxes lighter, and we will all serve you. And Rehoboam, he says, okay, Go away for 3 days and come back and I'll give you my decision. That's very good. And so he's going to go seek counsel. So Rehoboam goes and starts seeking counsel in verse number 6. And King Rehoboam consulted with the old men that stood before Solomon his father while he yet lived, and said, How do ye advise that I may answer this people? And they spake unto him, saying, If thou wilt be a servant unto this people this day, and wilt serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be thy servants forever. So that's the advice from his father's counselors. From Solomon's counselors to Rehoboam is show the people that you are a servant to them, and they will serve you forever. Grant the request and lower their taxes. That's the advice he got from his father's counselors. So good for him for seeking out counsel, right? That was a good thing. But what does the next verse say? What he does with that? He says, But he forsook the counsel of the old men, which they had given him, and consulted with the young men that were grown up with him, and which stood before him. And he said unto them, What counsel give ye, that we may answer this people, who have spoken to me, saying, Make the yoke which thy father put upon us lighter? And the young men that were grown up with him spake unto him, saying, Thus shalt thou speak unto this people, that spake unto thee, saying, Thy father made our yoke heavy, but thou make it lighter unto us. Thus shalt thou say unto them, My little finger shall be thicker than my father's loins, and now whereas my father did lade you with a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father hath chastened you with whips, but I will chasten you with scorpions. That's the advice that his peers gave him. So he asks the old men, the counselors of his father, what should I do? And they say, you should listen and you should show yourself to be a servant to the people. And he said, I don't like that. I don't like that advice. That's not what I wanted to hear. So then he goes to his peers and he says, what do you guys think I should do? And they said, you should make it tougher on them. Coming to you, think that you're weak. You tell them, my father scourged you with whips. I'm going to scourge you with scorpions. Like whatever he did, I'm going to double it. I'm going to make things harder. That's the advice he got from his peers. So what do you think Rehoboam is going to do, right? What would you do in that situation? There's two contrasting opinions, right? He got advice, some very different advice. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the third day, as the king had appointed, saying, Come to me again the third day. And the king answered the people roughly, and forsook the old men's counsel that they gave him, and spake to them after the counsel of the young men, saying, My father made your yoke heavy, and I will add to your yoke. My father also chastened you with whips, but I will chasten you with scorpions. So that's what he said to the people that came to him. He took the young men's advice. He forsook the old men's advice, and he took his peers' advice on how to handle this situation. If you skip down to verse number 16. So when all Israel saw that the king hearkened not unto them, the people answered the king, saying, What portion have we in David? Neither have we inheritance in the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now see to thine own house, David. So Israel departed unto their tents. And if you know your history, at that point, Israel was forevermore divided into two nations. You had the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin followed Rehoboam and kept them as their king. And the other 10 tribes, the other 10 northern tribes, put Jeroboam as their king. And that was a terrible end to, the united Israel, right? You had a great reign by King David, and then King Solomon after him basically conquered the whole world. And then Rehoboam, his first decision upon the throne, splits the kingdom in two, and as a poor poor time on the throne, where it seems like he didn't do anything right. And that's a pretty sad story, right? Especially with such a heritage, coming into it. As far as kings go, it's like your king was Superman, or your dad was Superman, and you're following that up, and he did quite a terrible job, right? But it was from the counsel that he took. So it matters who you get your counsel from. I can relate to Rehoboam. I haven't made all the greatest decisions in my life, and I haven't always sought great counsel with my decisions. I remember when I was young, when I was 21 years old, and back then, my ex-wife now, who is wanted to get married. It was a very spur of the moment thing, and she said, "Hey, let's get married." And I remember thinking, I'd grown up in church. I was raised with good parents who gave me wise counsel. Anytime I came up to them, always gave me good advice. I never got bad advice from my parents. And I remember thinking, if I ask anybody at all, they'll say no. So I'm not going to ask. Literally. That's my thought process. And then I thought, well, the only person in her life is her grandpa. She doesn't know anybody else. And he's not a Christian. I have no idea what kind of advice he'll give. But I should at least have the courtesy to ask him. So I did. And this was the advice he gave me. Well, you got to follow your heart. And I'm only 21 years old. But at 21, I still looked at that and I thought, well, that's terrible advice. I already know that that's terrible advice. Immediately, first verse that came to my mind is, the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Right? Immediately, it didn't take me more than a half a second to realize, that's bad advice. But it was the advice I wanted to hear. So I was like, sure, let's get married. And I did. I got eloped that same day. I didn't give it any time. I didn't, God has been good to me and has brought me through a lot. But that was not the greatest decision I ever made, and I went through a lot of hard times because of it, right? And I'm so grateful that I'm saved. I'm so grateful that God has let me keep my children and given me my wife now, who's amazing, above what I deserve for sure. And God is so good to me, but that was like the dumbest thing that I ever did in my life. It really was. It was a really bad decision. And a lot changed because of that decision. And, and since I remember getting advice when she had left me. I was, as soon as she had left me, I moved back here, and I was getting my real estate license. And in the meantime, I was working at Southwest Airlines, and there's a guy I worked with. His name was Ricky, and Ricky, he was not a liked person. Nobody liked Ricky, and he didn't make all the best decisions, and he was, he was divorced. He was living in a trailer and didn't have a whole lot, but he took me out to eat. I was a mess at that point in my life. I really was a mess. He took me out to eat on a lunch break at work. And he said, John, what you need to do? Because at the time I was trying to reconcile, trying my hardest. I want to reconcile. That's what I want. He said, you need to fly back to Oklahoma and just beat the snot out of her. And teach her not to cross you like that ever again. I'm standing across the table from him. I'm like, it's got to be the dumbest thing I've ever heard anybody say, ever. Like, you're serious? I said that. You're serious? Like, what? But that was really his advice. He took me out to eat and paid for my meal, which, was rare for Ricky, so that he can impart his wisdom to me, and that was his wisdom. And, if you look at if you're going to make decisions and you get counsel, it's important to look at the person you're getting the counsel from, right? You look at Rehoboam, I mean, his father's counselors did a pretty good job counseling. I mean, they had a track record of counseling Solomon, right? And Solomon was pretty successful from a world perspective, right? And from a leadership perspective. And you look at his peers, didn't really have a track record of success counseling, right? They were his peers. They were his age. And when I look at Ricky's life, it's not really somebody worth listening to, right? I mean, if you're going to get financial advice, if the person you're talking to can't pay their own bills, might not be the best person to get counsel from, right? If you're getting advice about anything, about real estate, if you're getting advice about real estate, talking to someone who has no real estate experience really isn't the best idea. And as a real estate agent, I deal with this all the time, you know? Where you're like, why didn't you ask me about that? I would have given you good counsel. That's what I do, you know? And I remember when I was getting into real estate as a job, not with a client, but as for myself, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do because ministry at that point was like, okay, that's off the table. What am I going to do? So I was looking at different options. I was looking at real estate, and I was looking at my real estate agent that I bought my house through. And I'm looking at her life, and I think, wow, this is an awesome person who, like, loves people, cares about people, does a great job. And I called her up and, asked her, her advice, what does she think about getting into real estate? And she knew my situation and knew I had 4 kids. And she said I shouldn't get into real estate. And she's like, here, you talk to this person, talk to this person, talk to this person. And so I did, and I called these different agents and interviewed at a bunch of different agencies. And I realized real quick, like, I don't want to be like any of those other people, right? I want my real estate business to look like hers, Michelle Hamshaw. I looked at her and I admired her for who she was, and I wanted my real estate business to look like that. So I said, you know what? I'm going to learn from her. So I just followed her around like a puppy dog to learn everything she had to teach me on purpose. Because, if I want to be a success, I could be the kind of success that some real estate agents have, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted what she had, right? And if you're whatever it is that you do in life, I mean, you got to get wise counsel from people that are successful in that area. Yeah. And, in Hebrews chapter 13, I want you to turn there. Hebrews 13, verse 17. Hebrews chapter number 13, verse number 17 says, obey them that have the rule over you, and submit yourselves, for they watch for your souls, as they that must give account, that they may do it with joy and not with grief, for that is unprofitable for you. So, what that's saying, the person he's talking about, obey them that have rule over you. He's talking about your pastor, and he's saying, hey, pay attention to what your pastor has to say. I mean, you can get a lot of knowledge and information from anywhere, and it's really important to pay attention to what your pastor has to say and your pastor's advice for you, because whether you go to some financial advisor for financial advice, or real estate advisor for real estate advice, or you're going to become a landlord, so you talk to someone who's been a landlord. Those are good things. But more important than all of that is your spiritual health, right? Yeah. I mean, that's what we're all here for, right? Your spiritual health. You can go to any source and get information and feed yourself anywhere But you can get full off of junk. You can. You can fill up with nonsense to where when your pastor has something to say, you've already decided you're going a different path and you ignore the advice of your pastor. You know, other people don't have the responsibility for your spiritual well-being. Your pastor does. God-given responsibility for you. Like, nobody else is responsible for my children. I am responsible for my children, right? I love them more than other people, right? So as they grow up, I know I'm going to deal with it. I hear Pastor talk about it with his kids, where he's like, oh, I told you that 100 times, and now you heard it from your friend, and now you believe it. Great, you know. But I hope my kids know that the counsel that I give them is for their best interest. But the same goes for your pastor. The counsel you get from your pastor is in your best interest to listen to. It really is. I had this friend at Bible college, and I remember he was a great guy. We had some great conversations all growing up. He was the same year as me, and I remember talking to him about different things. He was called to Russia his freshman year, and I was like, you don't know that you're called to Russia. You know, that's nonsense. I don't believe it. And he was like, no, I'm called to Russia. He doesn't even remember this conversation, which bugs me. Like, how do you not remember the conversation? But he's like, I'm called to Russia. And I was like, no, you're not. You don't even know who you're going to marry. You're 18 years old. You're not called to Russia. You know, God doesn't tell you what to do 20 years from now. He tells you what to do. And you know, I was young. I could have been just as wrong as he was. I was dumb too. But I remember talking to him, and there was something about this guy. He loved God. He loved God. He had a passion to serve God. And I remember, like, really building a great friendship, which I still have today. I have this friendship with him today. But I remember he got involved where he was learning and growing, and he was going to Russia, and he was being sponsored by the church he was at. He was on deputation, getting ready to go to Russia, and on his way, and he started getting some information from a coffee shop. There's a theological coffee shop there in Oklahoma, and he started getting some information, and started buying into it, you know, and started like ignoring his pastor's advice and diving into this theological coffee shop and what they had for him, right? And what they had for him to learn, because they taught lots of interesting things, and it was really cool. And talking to him, like, I would talk to him about the issues. There was a lot of issues with, you know, Calvinism versus Arminianism and all these deep theological things, and he's a smart guy, smarter than me. I'm not going to deny that. He could probably talk circles around me intellectually. But I remember sitting there talking to him like, okay, that's great. These are good questions, but I see a problem. And the problem I see is that you're not paying attention to what Pastor Gaddis has to say, right? You're kind of like ignoring your pastor and getting your information from over here and ignoring your pastor, right? Like, I don't disagree with anything you're saying because I don't have the brain to be willing to understand what you're saying. But I can see simply that you're ignoring your pastor. And things progressed and progressed, and eventually he had to leave the church. He didn't go to Russia. He ended up not serving God. And I love the guy. I love his family. He has kids that are my kids' age. You know, and anytime I get to see him, I'm happy to see him. But he's like a videographer working for a company, doing fine for himself. But I mean, like, he was on his way to Russia to serve God with his life, to make an impact in people's souls. And he was passionate about that. And like, what? He threw all that away for nothing. Like, he threw it away for nothing. Not because he had a disagreement doctrinally. Because Pastor Gaddis wasn't willing to entertain the idea, even though he doesn't know that he believes that. And, you know, it was like, At the end of the day, what happened is he ignored his pastor and got his information from somewhere else. And pastor warned him about it. He didn't listen. And he's not serving God. And it was just, man, it's really tough. You know, like I don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers to say what's right and what's wrong, but I can see the big picture. He's not serving God to any capacity at all anymore. And I look at that and I think, man, the guy had more potential than anybody I knew on what he could do for Christ. And, you know, and now he's doing nothing. He's doing nothing. And it's just sad for me to see. And all that to say is just pay attention to what your pastor has to say. We have people here at Foundation, people here at Bellevue, and both pastors are awesome. And with Pastor Matt, I think I know more than, besides his wife, I know more than anybody about his faults, right? And I would follow him as my pastor any day. I have so much respect for my brother. And like these are men of God that have been ordained and appointed by God for our benefit. And it would be ridiculous for us to ignore the things they have to teach us and to get fed at other places that are just not what God has for us. So anyway, let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you so much for all you've done. Lord, I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. And I pray that you'd help this message to speak to my heart, Lord. I pray that I would take my own advice, Lord, and that I would rely on my pastor and rely on his counsel and seek out his counsel, because I want more than anything to do what it is you want me to do, Lord. And you've put pastor in my life for my benefit, as you said in Hebrews, Lord, and I pray that I would take advantage of that, Lord. And I pray that we here would all take advantage of that as well, Lord. I thank you so much for all that you've done. In your name I pray. Amen. All right, you are dismissed.